gavel came down at $35. Sold to the man in the brown coat, the auctioneer said, and then he laughed, because $35 was what a man paid for a box he did not expect to open. You buying it for the iron, Earl? Or you just like rust? Earl Hutchins did not answer. He signed a slip, folded it once, and put it in his shirt pocket. He walked around the safe twice before the crowd moved on to the next lot, the way another man might walk around a horse he was thinking of buying. The safe sat on a hand truck in the gravel lot behind the old Corbin Hollow schoolhouse. Green paint gone to chalk, one corner dented where somebody's truck had backed into it sometime in the last 50 years. It weighed 340 pounds. The combination dial was frozen at 0, rust bleeding down from the seam like something had wept there once and dried. A strip of brittle tape still clung to the door, and on it, in pencil gone the color of a February sky, someone had written a single word. Later. Nobody else at that auction had looked twice at the tape. Earl had. He had noticed it from 30 feet away, before the bidding even opened, the way another man's eye might catch on a single crooked nail. It was the 9th of March, a Saturday, 41 degrees, under a sky the color of dishwater. 60-some people stood around in barn coats, bidding on desks and radiators and a flagpole gone green with verdigrease. Dale Pruett ran the auction the way he ran everything, loud and standing where people could see him. Corbin Hollow, Barrow County. A crowd of that size had not gathered in that gravel lot since the building closed. Earl Hutchins was 5'9" and had been 5'11" once, before 40 years of bending over other men's locks took the height out of his spine. His hands were wide and flat, knuckles swollen on the left one where the arthritis had settled in, permanent as weather, the nails cut close, and always a half-moon of gun oil worked into the creases no amount of scrubbing had ever fully lifted. His eyes were pale gray, and he had a habit, when he was thinking of running his thumb along whatever was in front of him, a door frame, a fence rail, the edge of a table, as if reading it. He wore a canvas coat, gone soft at the elbows, and a watch that had belonged to his wife, Ruth, dead 6 years now, the band too small for his own wrist, so he wore it loose, turned inward, where he could feel it against his pulse when he worked. He had opened his first safe in 1956, apprenticed at 17 to a locksmith named Otto, who ran a shop above the feed store and never once raised his voice at a stuck tumbler. We used to say a lock is not a wall. It is a conversation. Earl had carried that line for 50 years the way some men carry a Bible verse, and he had never found reason to set it down. The trade had mostly died around him. Banks used electronic keypads now. Locksmiths younger than his own sons worked out of vans with laptops instead of picks. But the sheriff's department still called him twice a year about some farmhouse box nobody could open, and old women still asked him to come look at their fathers' desks. And he still drove out for $20 when the job was worth $20, because a trade is not something a man quits. It is something he keeps doing until his hands will not let him anymore. He had never once, in 40 years, taken more than a job was worth. He had also never once turned one down for being too small to matter. Dale Pruett stood 6'2" in a silver suit that did not belong at a rural school auction, gold watch catching the gray light every time he raised his arm to call a bid. He ran auctions in 4 counties and had a voice built for it, the kind that filled a gravel lot without a microphone and made men bid $10 higher than they meant to make him stop looking at them. He drove a Cadillac 2 years old, kept it washed even in March mud, and told anyone who asked that he had sold more county surplus than any man in the state. He was not a cruel man. He gave to the volunteer fire department every Christmas without being asked, and had once talked to widows asking price down out of plain pity rather than greed, losing himself a commission to do it. But he had never in his life met a silence he did not feel the need to fill, and Earl Hutchins, standing quiet over a rusted safe, was more silence than Dale Pruett could stand. "Man's about to spend more on a torch than he paid for the box," Pruett said, grinning at the crowd, gold watch flashing as he swept his arm toward the safe like a man presenting a joke. Corbin Hollow Bank of Nothing. Ladies and gentlemen. The crowd laughed the way a crowd does, not because it was funny, but because the loud man laughed first, and it is easier to laugh with a loud man than to stand apart from him. Now, if you have ever seen a man who knew exactly what he was doing get laughed out of a room by a man who did not, subscribe to this channel. Because the people who stay for stories like Earl Hutchins's are exactly who this channel was built for. The Corbin Hollow Schoolhouse was built in 1951 for rooms and a bell tower out of brick fired at a kiln 11 miles south that closed before Earl was born. The county built it the year the war in Korea started, when there were still more children in Barrow County than the church basements could hold classes for, and men were still coming home missing pieces of themselves from the war before that one. The safe had been installed by the school board in 1952 to hold tuition receipts and the coal fund, a squat iron box bolted into the floor of the end room where the oldest student sat. For 16 years, it held nothing more remarkable than nickel-and-dime bookkeeping, ledgers gone soft with damp, a coffee tin of Buffalo nickels the janitor used to make change. By 1968, it held something else. That was the year Miss Alma Deakins taught senior English in that end room, and the year Danny Ray Coker was supposed to graduate. He did not walk with his class. He was drafted in January, killed outside Hughes City in April. 20 years old, 3 months before the ceremony, he had already written a speech for. The year the whole country seemed to be coming apart at its own seams, and half the boys in that classroom knew somebody who would not come home. Miss Deakins did not tell the class what she did with the speech. On the last day of school, before summer, and before the county board voted to consolidate the building out of use, she asked the janitor to hold the safe door open, and she put something inside it, and she told him to lock it, and she never told anyone what the combination had been changed to. She retired 2 years later and moved to her sister's place in Lexington and died in 1991 without ever mentioning the safe to another living soul, as far as anyone in Corbin Hollow ever learned. The school sat after that. The paint chalked. The bell tower lost its bell to scrap in 1979. 23 years came and went, then 20 more, then a slow 14 after that. 58 years total, give or take the season, before Earl Hutchins put down $35 for a box everyone else in the county thought was empty. He had known Danny Ray Coker's older sister once. Back before the war, took the boy, and the years took nearly everybody else who remembered him. He did not say that at the auction. He only ran his thumb along the pencil tape that said later, and thought, the way Otto or might have put it, that a schoolhouse does not forget. Only people do. He loaded the safe himself, chain and a come-along winched over the tailgate of his 1979 Ford, the springs groaning under 340 pounds of iron settling into the bed. It took him 25 minutes and both knees complaining before it sat square, and he checked the chain twice, then a third time, because a man his age falling under a safe was not a story he wanted to be part of. He drove home at 28 miles an hour, the whole 11 miles. Windows down despite the cold, because he did not trust the chain past 30 on the curves out past the Baptist church. 2 trucks passed him going the other way, and both slowed to look. By the time he pulled into his own gravel drive, 2 people had already called his neighbor Vernon to ask what Earl Hutchins was hauling home from the school sale. And Vernon, who did not know, told them it was probably nothing, which was the kind of thing Vernon said about everything right up until it wasn't. He backed the truck to the shop door and walked the safe in on a dolly, 1 careful inch at a time, the iron feet scraping a groove into the concrete he would still be able to see in 10 years. He set it under the single bare bulb that hung over his workbench, cut the radio off, though it had not been on, out of habit more than need, and pulled his stool up close enough that his knees touched the door. He laid his tools out in the order he always laid them, left to right, the way Otto had taught him 50 years before. Oil can picks, a rubber mallet, a magnifying loop on a cord around his neck he would not need for another hour yet. He made coffee first. He always made coffee first. Ruth used to tell him it was the only ritual he had, and she was not wrong. The first attempt told him nothing at all. The dial spun loose and hollow. No resistance. No click. The tumblers inside long since rusted into a single frozen mass that turned as one piece instead of 4. He worked penetrating oil into the seam around the door with a syringe, 1 drop at a time, patient as a man feeding a bird that did not yet trust his hand. And then he sat back and let it work for 40 minutes by the wall clock, because a man in a hurry breaks more locks than he opens. He drank the coffee slow. He did not look at the safe the whole 40 minutes, on purpose. The way Otto were used to make him look away from a lock so his fingers would remember it better than his eyes could. The second attempt gave him movement, a half turn, then resistance, a grinding deep in the mechanism like a jaw working against grit that had not moved since Nixon was in office. His left hand ached by then, the cold and the effort both settling into the joints, and he flexed it twice against his knee before going back to the dial. He thought, not for the first time that night, that he was getting too old for boxes this size, 71 years old with a hand that argued with him more than it used to, and he sat with that doubt a moment, honestly, before setting it aside the way he had set aside every doubt that ever stood between him and a locked door. He applied more oil. He waited again, 20 minutes this time, listening to the wall clock, and once a dog barking 3 farms over. His back ached from the stool. His reading glasses fogged when he leaned in close enough to smell the rust, a smell like an old penny held too long in a child's hand. The third attempt was the one that mattered. He worked the dial by feel more than sound, the way he had learned to compensate for a left ear that did not hear as well as it used to, 3 wheels catching one after another in a rhythm his fingers recognized before his mind did, until he felt the last will drop into place under his fingers, a small give, no bigger than a coin, settling into a pocket. It was 9:11 at night when it opened. The sound was not dramatic. It was a click, and then a sigh, air escaping a space that had not moved in 58 years, the door swinging outward on a hinge that groaned once, and then went quiet. The smell came out before the door was even halfway open. Old paper, cold iron, and under that, faint as a held breath, the smell of chalk dust, as though some of 1968 had been sealed in there along with everything else. Earl did not reach in. He sat on his stool with the door swung open in front of him and looked, the bare bulb throwing yellow light into a space no wider than a bread box. And for a long moment he did nothing at all. His back ached. His hands, he noticed, were shaking slightly, though the shop was not that cold, and he pressed them flat against his knees until they stopped. He put on his reading glasses, though he did not yet strictly need them for what was in front of him, because it was a thing his hands did when his mind needed a moment to catch up to what his eyes were already seeing. There were 5 items inside, and he took them out one at a time, laying each on the bench before touching the next, the way Otto had taught him. You never dig in a safe. You empty it in order and let it tell you its own story. First came a coffee tin, dented, holding 11 buffalo nickels and a folded ledger sheet listing the coal fund balance for the spring term of 1968 for $1.60 in a hand that was not the same hand that wrote everything else. Second came a manila folder of tuition receipts, brittle and fox brown at the corners, nothing in them worth more than the paper itself. Third was a class ring, gold gone dull, a red stone with a chip in one corner, 1968 stamped small along the band, initials DRC scratched inside, where a jeweler's tool had once fit a boy's finger that would never grow any older than 20. Fourth was a folded speech, 6 pages, the ink faded to the brown of dried tea, Corbin Hollow valedictory, typed across the top, a girl's careful hand beneath it. Miss Deacon's, as he would learn later, not the boy's own, though the boy had added lines of his own in blue ink after the typing was done. Fifth, at the very bottom, was an envelope sealed, a single name written across the front in the same careful hand, Loretta Coker. He did not open it. That was not his to open. He sat with all 5 items laid out under the bare bulb for what he later reckoned was near 20 minutes, hearing nothing but the tick of the shop's old wall clock and, once, a truck passing far off on the county road. He read the first page of the speech, then folded it back along its own 58-year-old crease, careful as a man handling something that might not survive a second unfolding. One line stayed with him longer than the rest, in the dead boy's own hand at the bottom of a page, added after the typed portion in blue ink. The letters slanted the way a young man's hand slants when he is writing something. He means, I intend to come home and build something that lasts. He wiped his hands on his trousers, though they were not dirty, and sat a while longer before he did anything else. A memory came to him then, unbidden. Danny Ray Coker at 14, sweeping the schoolyard for a dime an hour the summer Earl himself was fixing the Mercantile's front door lock. The boy whistling some tune Earl, could no longer name. He had not thought of that boy in 30 years. He thought of him now, plainly, the way a man thinks of somebody he only half knew but never forgot. Then he stood, put the coffee pot on again, and went back out to the shop to clean his tools, because a man has to do something with his hands when the rest of him does not know what to do at all. He delivered it himself the next morning, no ceremony, minimum words. Loretta Coker was 74 now, living in the same county 11 miles from where her brother's ring had sat locked in the dark for longer than she had been out of grade school herself. Earl stood on her porch with his hat off and the tin, the folder, the ring, the speech, and the sealed envelope all laid careful in a shoebox. And he said only, this was Danny Ray's. Miss Deakins put it away for him. I figure it was time it came home. She did not cry loud. She sat down right there on the porch step, the ring held in one fist, and read the envelopes outside twice before she opened it. And Earl stood and waited with his hat in both hands, because that was what the moment called for, and nothing else. A neighbor woman across the road, watching from her own porch, told Vernon later that she figured it was just an old man returning something small, nothing worth stopping for. She was wrong, and would say so herself before the week was out. Word got to Dale Pruett by Tuesday, the way things get around in a county that size. He did not come by the shop. He sent no message. What Earl heard, secondhand from Vernon, was that Pruett had gone quiet at his own auction that following weekend, had let another man run the gavel for 2 full lots, and had told somebody near the coffee table that he wished to God he had looked twice at that tape himself instead of making a joke of it. His auctions kept running in 4 counties. He was by most every account after that a good deal quieter at them. The County Historical Society asked to display the ring and the speech in the old schoolhouse, which the town had begun fixing up as a small museum with grant money and volunteer labor. Earl said that was fine, so long as nobody put his name on a plaque anywhere near it. He was not owed anything for finding what a teacher had hidden 58 years before, and he told them so plainly, and they left it at that. He went back to work that same afternoon. A farmer 3 miles out had a strong box with a busted tumbler, and Earl drove out in the same truck at the same 28 miles an hour and fixed it for $20 because that was what the job was worth. Children touched that class ring now, under glass in the old end room where Miss Deakins once taught English, and asked their teachers what it is and why a ring would be locked in an iron box for 58 years. The answer given is always some version of the truth, that a boy did not come home, and a woman kept a promise, and a locksmith with a bad hand in a slow truck happened to notice a word written in pencil that 60 other people walked straight past. What would you have done, standing in that gravel lot? Laughed along with the loud man, or looked twice at the tape the quiet one was reading? And when your own name is on something nobody opens for 58 years, who do you hope is standing there when it finally does?